I was in high school, I went on a retreat weekend every fall and every spring. And this program was called Life Teen. It was our youth group retreat. And they did a lot of work to have these weekends for us twice a year. There'd be as many as 200 teenagers who would come out for these retreats. And they were like most retreats that you may have been on. There were lots of talks. There were small groups that debriefed and prayed together. There were evenings for confession and worship. And I've been on similar retreats as an adult, on Kairos, on Christ Renews Parish. You may have been on Curcio or Anglican Fourth Day or Dynamos or Camp Aramenta. We have these concentrated spiritual experiences of prayer and worship. Sometimes we call them the mountaintop experiences. They fire us up. And as a church, we have just gone through one of these concentrated spiritual experiences. We've gone through Holy Week. We've gone through Easter. We had a baptism, an ordination, a confirmation. We received many new members. And just like at the end of a retreat, you come out of that season and you're back in daily life. You wake up, you do whatever you do during the day, you come home, and we can be left asking ourselves, well, what do I do now? So what do we do now as we move forward from this concentrated spiritual experience? Too often, we kind of buckle down and we jump into life and we say, well, maybe I can go on another retreat next year. That'd be nice. The disciples in our gospel reading today find themselves in a similar place. They're at the end of this incredible spiritual experience. We call it the incarnation. God himself came down and spent years with them, teaching them, eating with them, laughing and crying with them, working miracles through them. And then he died and resurrected. And where do we find them today in the gospel reading? They're back home in Galilee fishing. Well, in part, they hadn't been sent out on their mission yet. We'll see that soon at Pentecost in our readings. So for now, they might be asking themselves, what do we do now? How does this change daily life? Even if we come out of Easter and our daily lives don't really look any different, we still have our job, we still have our families. Our life hasn't necessarily been changed by Easter, but we've been changed by Easter. And so when we get back into daily life, we're called to faithfully live in daily life. And faithfulness is this word we use a lot, right? What does it mean in daily life, though? Well, the first thing we often think of, we all might jump into, is prayer. I'm going to pray in the morning, I'll pray in the evening, and that's good. We should do that. But what about daily life between your morning and evening prayer, right? You go out, something fills your day. What does it mean to live faithfully in whatever it is, whether it's school or in sports or work or raising children or taking care of your family or taking care of aging parents? There's something that fills your day. And what does it mean to do that faithfully now that you've experienced Easter? The philosopher Alasdair MacIntyre has, I think, a helpful illustration I want to share with you. He writes, imagine that you're standing at a bus stop, minding your own business, and a man approaches you and says, the name of the common wild duck is Hysteronicus, Hysteronicus, Hysteronicus. And he walks away. Well, what was that about? You understand the words in the sentence because it's in English, but you have no idea what this sentence means. But why? That's the important part. Why? Because you don't know the story that experience fits inside of. So MacIntyre says, well, you might determine this man's clearly delusional. He's suffering from mental illness. That's a story that would make this make sense. But MacIntyre says, well, there might be another story you need to think about. Perhaps this man was at the public library yesterday and saw someone who looks remarkably like you. And that person came up to him and said, do you know the Latin name of the common wild duck? And he said, well, no, I don't. And then he left, and he was inquisitive, so he looked it up, and the next day he sees what he thinks is that person, although it's you, and he comes up to you and says, the name of the common wild duck is Hysteronychus, Hysteronychus, Hysteronychus. Well, that's a story that could make that make sense. But MacIntyre says, but there's another thing. He could be a foreign agent. And he's at a rendezvous point, and he's mistaken you for his contact, and he's revealing himself to you with the code word, Hysteronychus, Hysteronychus, Hysteronychus. So all of these stories, they're possible. Only one is true. But what you do next depends on which story you decide is the true story. So what do you do next? Well, you could kill him. I mean, after all, he's a foreign agent. He's here to probably assassinate someone or steal state secrets, and so that's the right thing to do for the common good. Unless he is delusional and suffering from mental illness, and then that would be a tragic error. So in that case, you might call the authorities. This man clearly needs help. He needs to be taken to the hospital. Unless he's a guy from the public library who happened to mistake you for someone else who was just giving you some information from an encyclopedia. Well, then that'd be an overreaction. You have to figure out which is the true story to make sense of this event in your life, to make sense and determine the right thing to do. That means when we go back to work after Easter, or raising kids, or caring for our family, we have to do it recognizing the Easter story as true. We have to do it recognizing that Jesus is king, even of those moments, of every decision we make in our daily life. He's the decision maker. And if we think of ourselves as the decision makers, we're in the wrong story. And we'll make the wrong decisions. We'll think that making money is because we're talented and successful and that we are able to choose what to do with it. Instead of it being an opportunity to acquire wealth to give away. Or if you're a student, you might think, I need to get straight A's to make good grades, to have a good resume for when I go to college, to make my parents happy. Instead of developing yourself so that you can do whatever God has made you to do. Making money, making good grades, travel, sports, that's all fine. But why pursue them with our lives? Our lives are the chief thing we have to spend on things. If you cannot in any way connect your daily life to the Easter story, you're living in the wrong story. You're in danger of making the wrong decisions. You're probably in the American dream story, the most common alternative story in our society. So what does living our daily life in the Easter story really look like then? Well, Tim Keller, the famous pastor in New York, had an actor, a television actor, come to faith in his church. And the actor came to Tim Keller and said, I need you to disciple me. And Tim Keller said, oh, sure, I've done this many times. So he immediately thought of a good Bible study that they could meet over coffee once a week. And he started sharing this idea with the actor. And the actor said, no. I need you to disciple me as an actor. I'm a Christian now. What roles can I take? What roles can I not take? What do I have to do with my daily work? The young man was really wise. He was asking for help because he didn't know how to live faithfully in daily life. And he wanted to know that. Now, clearly, there are some roles that he couldn't take as a Christian. There's film out there that degrades human life for no other reason than cheap entertainment. And as a side, if you're watching something that a Christian actor shouldn't be acting in, ask yourself if you should be watching it and consuming it. But back to our actor, what about all the parts that are going to come his way as a young actor that may be fine? How does he decide what to take and what not to take? Well, if he's living in the American dream story, then the questions are, is this going to make money? Is it going to further my career? Is it going to make my resume look sharper? Is it going to open up future opportunity for me? But he wanted to know, what does the Easter story ask? And the Easter story is centered on Jesus the King as the decision maker. And so if we want to know what to do, we have to listen for his voice. Faithfully living in our daily lives requires staying alert always for the King's voice whenever it might show up and prompt us. If you look at verse 5 in our gospel reading today, Jesus says to his disciples, "Children, do you have any fish?" And he knows they don't, so they say, "No, we don't." And he says, "Well, cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you'll find some." And it's important to note the disciples don't recognize Jesus at this point, but they obey. Now, they've been at this all night. They haven't caught a thing, and they know an awful lot about fishing. This is what they do with their days. So I'm not convinced that if anyone standing on the shore had said, "You know what, guys? Just cast on the other side. You'll be good." I don't know that they would have bought that. But something in them knew this was a voice to obey. And that's something we need to learn in our own daily lives. We need to develop ears that hear the prompting of the King's voice, even when we don't recognize him, even when we're not sure if it's him. And that doesn't just happen. In this case, the disciples have been with Jesus for years. And for us, this is only developed in prayer that specifically spends time every day listening for Jesus' voice. And we often don't know definitively if it is Jesus' voice. Very few of us in our lifetime will hear an audible voice. But if we develop this habit, this spiritual habit of listening in individual prayer and in community prayer, and that's so important. We can't just discern things alone. We're the church, we're a body, we're a community. We have to discern things in community. But if we listen over time, we will learn to differentiate and hear the King's voice amidst all the other voices in the world. And we'll develop this habit of obeying faithfully, instinctively, like we see the disciples do in this passage. Thomas Merton was a Trappist monk in Kentucky. He wrote many books. He wrote this lovely prayer that I think is on point. You may have heard it before. He writes, "My Lord God, I have no idea where I'm going. I don't see the road ahead of me, and I can't know where it will end. And the fact that I think I'm following your will doesn't mean I'm actually doing so. But I believe that the desire to please you, in fact, pleases you. And I hope I have that desire in all that I'm doing. I hope that I will never do anything apart from that desire. And I know that if I do this, you will lead me by the right road, though I may know nothing about it. And therefore I will trust you always. Though I may seem lost and in the shadow of death, I will not fear, for you are ever with me, and you will never leave me to face my perils alone." We could add, "You'll never leave me to face any decision in my daily life alone." That's the prayer of a man praying for guidance, the prayer of a man listening to learn the King's voice, trusting that the Lord will prompt. So how do we begin to learn when Jesus is prompting us and when he's not? Well, we have to do it like the disciples over time. And what happens when the disciples obey the voice? They pull in a huge load of fish, 153 large fish that should have, by all accounts, broken the net, but somehow didn't break this net. It reminds us of the feeding of the 5,000, or of the wine at the wedding of Cana, or of the 3,000 saved at Pentecost. That fruit, when we obey the prompting, is what teaches us that was the voice of God. That was what I was called to do. Because when Jesus directs us and we obey, it's not arbitrary. It's for a purpose. It's for his kingdom. And we often see the fruit. Well, what does that mean for you? What do you do now as you go back after this concentrated Easter season we've had as a church, back to daily life? I think there's two things. First, I've said this, spend time every day in prayer, listening, asking and listening. And again, that has to be done individually and in community. Do you have friends that you pray with every week? You need to pray with friends every week and ask them to pray for the same things you're praying about and see if the Holy Spirit reveals the same thing to you and your friends. That's part of Christian discernment. The second thing is this: the most meaningless, mundane, boring part of your week will be revealed to be part of the work of God. If the Easter story is the story that everything you do fits in, then the most boring, seemingly useless thing you do with your week will be revealed to be part of the work of God. As Americans, we want to do important things. And what does important mean? Big, right? Big. Mother Teresa said everyone wants to help the poor across the world. Nobody seems to want to help the poor in their own neighborhood. We want to do something romantic and big. But we're called to love and serve where we are. And that's the reality. That's our home, that's our neighborhood, that's our daily life. I'll give you a very common example from my daily life. I change a lot of diapers. And I know when I hear my wife say, "Daddy, we have a poopy diaper." Okay, there are a lot of other things I would rather do. But let's be really practical for a second. If no one ever changed my son's diaper, ever, literally, he would die. Right? He would die. That's why we change diapers. That's why we have cleanliness. So in a real sense, protecting his health, protecting his life, is cooperating with the very one who gave him life and health. This awful thing that many of us had to do, and at some point we've all had our diaper changed, right, isn't just a meaningless thing, another task I have to get through. It's actually participating with the life-giving, life-sustaining work of God. There are some prayer books that have come out recently, and there have been many of these throughout church history that offer prayers for moments in your life. Some are for even getting dressed in the morning. Well, there's one that came out this year, and it has this really beautiful prayer for changing diapers. I want to read this for you, because I think it drives the point home well. Heavenly Father, in such menial moments as this, the changing of a diaper, I remember this truth. My unseen labors are not lost, for it is these repeated acts of small sacrifice that, like a bright, ragged patch, will be slowly sewn together as a quilt of love that will swaddle this child. And I'm not just changing a diaper. By love and service, I'm tending a budding heart that, rooted early in such grace-filled devotion, might one day be more readily inclined to bow to your compassionate conviction, knowing itself then as both a receptacle and a reservoir of heavenly grace for the world. So this little act of diapering, though in form sometimes felt as base drudgery, might be better described as one of 10,000 acts by which I'm actively creating a culture of compassionate service and selfless love to shape the life of this family and this beloved child. So, Lord, take this unremarkable act of necessary service, O Christ, and in your economy, let it be multiplied into that greater outworking of worship and of faith, a true investment in the incremental advance of your kingdom across generations. Open my eyes that I might see this act of what it is from the fixed vantage point of eternity, O Lord. How the changing of a diaper might sit upstream of the changing of a heart, and how the changing of a heart might sit upstream of the changing of the world. That's beautiful. A prayer that changing a diaper plays a role in advancing the kingdom of God and in redeeming the world. These last few weeks have shown us You don't need to go out and find your story. You don't need to go out and make your story. We've learned the story, the one true story that makes everything else make sense. But as we do move forward back into daily life, ask yourself, what are the things in your daily life that still need to find their place in the Easter story? And are you listening amidst daily life for the voice of the Easter King? Amen.